When the frail old woman walked into the dojo, everyone laughed, but none of them noticed the fire in her eyes or the way she studied every move like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. They mocked her as a fragile outsider, until the day she stepped onto the mat and revealed she was the most dangerous fighter the room had ever seen. The bell above the glass door gave a tired jingle as Thelma Gardner eased into the Golden Dragon Karate Academy, the late afternoon light catching in the scuffs of the polished floor. She paused just inside to let her eyes adjust. One hand settled on the curved handle of her wooden cane, the other cradling a neatly folded white gi against her chest. The room smelled faintly of sweat and disinfectant, and the lemon oil someone had used on the front desk. A burst of laughter cracked from the mats, quick and bright as a snapped board, then softened into whispers when the students noticed her. "Can I help you?" asked the receptionist without looking like she meant it. Her badge read Amanda in block letters that felt sharper than her tone. "I'd like to observe a class," Thelma said, breath steady, voice low and pleasant. The GI in her arms was an adult small that would hang on her, but she held it with the tenderness of a keepsake. "And if it suits, I'd like to enroll." Amanda's gaze flicked to the cane, back to Thelma's lined face, then toward the training floor where 20 white-clad bodies moved in unison. Beyond the viewing glass, the instructor stalked the front line, calling cadence that made sleeves pop and belts snap. He was in his 40s, salt and pepper hair, cropped close, posture taut as a drawn bow. When he shouted, again, the room obeyed like a single organism. "Let me, get the manager," Amanda said. "You can sit there." The bench was against the glass. Thelma settled on it slowly, arranging the cane parallel. To her shins, the gi carefully in her lap. She watched with the attention of someone listening to a song she hadn't heard in years but still knew by heart. Her eyes tracked a boy whose back heel kept lifting in front stance, the set of a girl's shoulders that tightened before every punch. The instructor's habit of pivoting left a fraction early. None of it showed on her face. The nerves were there. She felt them in the tremor at the edge of her fingers. But she breathed through it until her hands were steady on the cloth. "Sensei Rick," Amanda called when a water break scattered the students. The instructor glanced up, rolled his towel in his palm, and came out to the lobby with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Ma'am," he said, "what can we do for you?" "I'm interested in your beginner's class," Thelma replied, standing with care. She was short and compact beneath the floral cardigan, the kind of woman who might have been mistaken for frail if not for the way her spine stacked perfectly when she rose. There was the briefest falter in the instructor's smile, then the kind of expression professionals wear when they're deciding how honest to be. "Our program is fairly demanding. We have to think about safety, liability." A woman with a clipboarded confidence appeared from the office like she'd been summoned. "I'm Erica, the business manager," she said, shaking Thelma's hand as if closing a deal. "We pride ourselves on inclusivity, of course, but we also want you to have a positive experience. Tai Chi at the community center is very popular." "I'm looking for karate," Thelma said, mild as warm tea. "If it doesn't fit, I'll be the first to recognize it." Erica and Rick traded a look that balanced budget lines against bruises. The hum of the class reformed on the mats, belts were tied, bodies returned to lines. "Trial period," Rick said finally. "Beginner class meets Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 4. Amanda will set you up with a rental GI." Paperwork bloomed like pages in a new book. Waivers, emergency contacts, medical disclosures. Thelma filled them with neat, deliberate penmanship. In the locker room, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while she slipped the GE top over her cardigan, the cotton stiff and starchy against her skin. The pants were long and baggy. She rolled the waist and tied the cord. The belt, though, thin, unforgiving, stubborn as a knot in a rope. She stood in front of the narrow mirror with the belt's tails hanging unevenly and tried to remember the sequence she'd watched through the glass. Left over right, loop, pull, tuck. The fabric rasped. The knot came out lopsided. When she stepped back onto the floor, conversation puddled and then retreated. A blond boy with a wrestler's shoulders elbowed his friend and performed a pantomime of tying a belt behind her back, exaggerated and wrong. "Bingo nights that way," he stage whispered, tilting his chin at the far end of the strip mall. His friend, the tall one with easy cruelty in his laugh, choked on it like it tasted too good. "Tyler," Rick said, "not sharp enough to cut." Thelma approached the instructor with careful steps. She felt the eyes on her like heat lamps. "Is this correct?" she asked, touching the crooked knot. Rick tugged the ends, flipped the wrap, tied it again, quick and efficient like he'd done it 100 times, which he had, and then pointed to a space at the back of the far line. "Follow along as best you can. No cane on the mat," he added, gentler than his face let on. She set the cane against the wall where the sunlight made dust. Float like paper ash. The first command came, front stance. The line sank. Thelma lowered and her right knee flared with a hot message she didn't need to read twice. She adjusted, weight too high, foot too narrow. Her body remembered one thing. Her body protested another. She let the protest win for now. Punch. She threw it a beat late. Block. Her arm rose on the wrong side, then drifted across to correct itself. The class moved like a tide around a rock. She stood, awkward eddy in the back corner, wobbling once, catching herself with fingers that brushed her thigh and not the floor. The laughter came in thin threads at first, then in a small, braided rope from the corner where the blond boy and his tall friend practiced nothing and watched everything. Horse dance, the tall one murmured, hips swinging in an ugly imitation. Nay. Josh, Rick cautioned without turning. Thelma didn't look their way. She kept her gaze fixed softly on Rick's feet when he demonstrated stances, on the lines of hips and knees that determined balance or the lack of it. She let herself be taught as if this were new, because in a way it was. The muscles she relied on now were different. The axis of her balance shifted by time. She misstepped twice, then 3 times, then deliberately a 4th to make the 3rd seem like luck. When Rick turned down the line to correct a teenager's fist, she watched how he shortened his own stance to do it. When the girl 2 spaces ahead tightened her shoulders before every strike, Thelma inhaled with her, exhaled with her, and felt the tension release like a lid loosening on a jar. They moved into basic blocks. Her timing lagged, feet catching in the hem of pants she'd rolled, but not enough. Once, when she pivoted, the world went light for a fraction of a second, and she rode it out with a breath so controlled no one saw it happen. The blond boy smirked. Careful, Grandma, he said under his breath. The echo of it rippled a little too far. Line up, Rick barked. The room obeyed. Bows broke the hour into before and after, and the sound of belts and zippers returned like regular traffic. Thelma stood at the edge of the mat and waited until Rick finished answering a parent's question about fees. Then she stepped forward, lifted her hands, and bowed from the waist with a correctness that made his eyes blink once. Thank you, Sensei, she said, the title shaped accurately on her tongue. I'll do better. Something pricked behind his professional smile. We'll see you Wednesday, he said, and if he sounded uncertain, that was his to wonder about later. In the lobby, the tall boy, Josh, threw his gym bag over his shoulder, mimed a bow so theatrical it became a taunt. Thank you, Sensei, he sing-songed to his friend. Tyler bent double with silent laughter, then straightened when he caught the receptionist watching. Mia, the slight girl whose front kick had improved when her shoulders released, stared down at her water bottle instead of at the cruelty vibrating in the air. Thelma changed slowly, folding the G with care that made the fabric softer under her palms. She slid her cardigan back on and buttoned it with her thumbs, each click small and decisive. When she returned the uniform for laundering, Amanda kept her eyes on the computer. See you, Wednesday, she said into the screen. Outside, the strip mall wore its evening like a weary face. Long shadows reached across the parking slots. A grocery cart sighed against a curb. Thelma adjusted her goros. Asses hooked the strap of her canvas bag over her shoulder and retrieved her cane from the wall. The first step always hurt less than the second. She took it anyway, the rhythm of the cane against concrete, an old metronome. She felt the door's gaze on her back, the eyes behind it, the 2 boys who would recount their jokes on the ride home and make themselves larger by shrinking someone else. At the Buick, she rested a hand on the roof and breathed in, breathed out, letting the echo of the room leave her bones. The sun hung low, gold diluted by a smear of cloud, and in that light her reflection in the window looked older than she felt. She smiled at the woman in the glass, there you are, and opened the door. Dignity traveled with her like a shawl she did not put down. She set the cane along the passenger floor, placed the bag on the seat, and settled behind the wheel. Before the engine turned, she sat with her hands on the circle and let the silence wash the laughter away. It did not all go. Some stuck. Thin, sticky strands that would tug later when she replayed the wobble, the wrong foot, the slow pivot. She allowed the tug and then let it fall. At the end of the row, she checked the mirror. The dojo's glass threw back the sky. Through it, she saw shapes moving, a hand striking, a headband tying, a manager's clipboard crossing the floor like a verdict. She saw too the small girl, Mia, glancing out after her, curiosity bright as a pinprick of light. Thelma drove home with the radio off. She cataloged what mattered, the way Rick set his stance before he spoke, the cadence of the count, the student's breath hitting the room like surf, her own body's descent and how to coax it, the belt knot she'd tie better next time, the arrogance on 2 young faces that was really just fear with its knuckles up. She counted the seconds between green lights by the length of an inhale. When she parked in front of her building, dusk had cooled to blue. She took the stairs one at a time, cane, foot, breath. Inside, the small apartment welcomed her with its tidy quiet. She hung the cardigan over the back of a chair, set water to boil without thinking, and only then let her hand hover where the jai had rested against her chest. The skin there remembered the rasp of cotton and something else beneath, a thrum she had put away for years. Tomorrow she'd review the stance. Tomorrow she'd loosen the knees sooner, widen the base by an inch. She would make the same mistake twice so the third time looked miraculous. She would thank the sensei again because gratitude disarms what mockery cannot. And when she turned to leave, she would let the edge of whatever lived in her eyes show for just a second. The flicker that said the story you think you're in isn't the one you're actually in. For now, she lifted the kettle at its first shy whisper, poured water over a tea bag and a chipped mug, and stood at the sink while steam braided itself into the kitchen light. Her hands shook briefly. She waited them still. The laughter would crackle again on Wednesday. The whispers would tuck themselves in corners. The G would be softer, the not better, the stance a hair closer to true. She would walk in with her cane and the tired bell would jingle, and the room would not know the difference between a woman who has nothing to prove and a woman who has chosen not to. Not yet. Thelma returned to the dojo 2 days later, the late afternoon sky washed in pale orange as though the sun itself was holding its breath. She walked more firmly this time, the cane clicking against the concrete like a metronome marking her resolve. The GI was folded neatly in a canvas bag she carried against her hip. Her heart was steady, not because the nerves had vanished, but because she had learned to welcome them. Nerves meant she was still alive, still here, still ready to do what others thought she couldn't. Inside, Amanda barely glanced up from the computer. "They'll start in 15, she said, her voice clipped, as though Thelma's presence still confused the natural order of things. Thelma nodded, heading straight for the locker room. She slipped into the stiff uniform with more grace this time, cinching the belt in a knot that sat snug and even at her waist. Her reflection in the mirror looked back at her with calm eyes, though a spark gleamed there now, a tiny flare that hadn't been visible on Monday. On the training floor, students were already warming up. Mia was stretching near the back corner, her movements careful, as though she were trying to avoid notice. When she spotted Thelma, she hesitated, then offered a shy smile. Thelma inclined her head in a quiet greeting. The room buzzed with low conversation until Rick barked the call to line up. Tyler and Josh sauntered in at the last second, laughing about something, the sound sharp enough to draw glances. Today's class began with simple drills, punches, blocks, front kicks, but Thelma noticed something had changed. The students were faster, sharper, their bodies younger and eager. Her own body still resisted. Her knees ached, her hips caught on the turns, and her timing faltered. The snickers came again, barely disguised. "Front stance, not flamingo pose," Josh muttered loudly enough for Tyler to snort. Thelma heard them, but kept her face serene. Their mockery slid past her like water off polished stone. She moved slowly, deliberately, adjusting by millimeters. If she lost her balance, she did not rush to recover. She let the mistake live for a heartbeat, then corrected it. Halfway through class, Rick called for light sparring. Students paired off quickly, leaving Thelma standing alone until Josh grinned and stepped forward. "I'll go with her," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Tyler smirked, elbows nudging a younger student as though the evening's entertainment had just been announced. Rick's jaw tightened. "Light contact, Josh. I mean it." "Of course, Sensei," Josh said with false innocence, slipping into a ready stance. Thelma bowed as tradition required. Josh mirrored the motion but exaggerated it, earning a ripple of laughter from the back row. When Rick called begin, Josh threw a lazy jab that grazed Thelma's shoulder. She tried to block, too late. Another jab, this one faster, caught her forearm. She stumbled, righted herself, and tried to step into a basic counterpunch, but her timing was off and Josh danced easily out of range. "Come on, Grandma," he teased under his breath, circling her. "You can hit harder than that, right?" A light kick tapped her hip. She nearly lost her balance and caught herself with one hand on the mat. The laughter was no longer hidden. Tyler's booming chuckle rolled across the room like a drumbeat. Even a few students who hadn't mocked her before looked away uncomfortably. Rick's voice cracked across the room. "Enough. Next drill." His tone carried a warning, but Josh was grinning when he returned to Tyler's side, whispering something that made both of them smother more laughter. Thelma stood still for a long moment, catching her breath, her chest rising and falling with quiet control. Then she bowed again, perfectly formal, and returned to her place in line. Mia's eyes followed her, troubled, as if something about the old woman's calm unsettled her more than anger would have. When class ended, the students dispersed in a flurry of chatter and sneakers squeaking on wood. Thelma approached Rick. Kay bowed low once more and said softly, "Thank you, Sensei. I look forward to next time." Rick blinked. Something in the way she said it, the precision of the bow, made him hesitate before nodding. "Wednesday, then." In the locker room, Thelma changed slowly, aware of voices drifting from the adjacent men's room. "Did you see her trying to do horse stance?" Tyler's voice carried, mocking and cruel. "Like a baby giraffe," Josh added, then imitated Thelma's formal tone. "Thank you, Sensei." The sound of their laughter echoed against the tiles. "Come on, guys," Mia's voice broke in, softer but firm. "That's enough." "You defending her now?" Tyler challenged. "She doesn't belong here, and you know it," Josh said. Mia didn't reply right away, but her locker slammed shut with a loud, metallic snap. "Maybe she belongs here more than you think," she said finally, and her footsteps left the room. Thelma folded the GI with deliberate care, her face unreadable. She returned it to the desk, thanked Amanda politely, and walked to her car with her head high. The cane's tapping was steady, rhythmic, as though each strike marked not defeat, but intention. When she reached her apartment that night, she placed the folded G on the chair, washed her hands, and prepared a simple meal. She ate slowly, thinking about every moment of class, not with bitterness but with something closer to strategy. After dinner, she opened the wooden box in her closet. The black belt inside seemed to absorb the lamplight, its fabric worn thin in places, each fray a story. She held it across her lap for a moment, feeling its weight, then traced the faded embroidery with her finger. Her reflection in the window looked back at her, ghosted against the night sky. She breathed deep, once, twice, until her chest settled into the slow rhythm she had learned decades ago. Somewhere deep inside, something long asleep stirred. The dojo had mocked her, tested her, measured her against its shallow expectations. They thought they had seen her limits. They hadn't seen anything yet. Mia couldn't get the image of Thelma out of her mind. The way she bowed after class, not as a clumsy newcomer, but like someone who understood the weight of tradition. That night, she sat cross-legged on her bed, laptop glowing in the dim room. She typed Thelma Gardner karate into the search bar. At first, nothing came up but scattered obituaries and Facebook profiles of unrelated Gardners. Then, buried on page 4 of the results, she found a scan of a decades-old martial arts magazine. The headline read, "Thunderhand Gardner shocks Tokyo Open." Mia's breath caught as she scrolled down. The grainy black and white photo showed a young black woman in a crisp GI, her fist frozen mid-strike, hair braided tight against her head. The caption was blurred, but the name was clear, Thelma Gardner. The short article praised her as one of the few American women to train in Japan during the early 70s, a prodigy who had risen through the ranks faster than most men. But the article ended abruptly, torn, the last paragraph missing. Mia closed the laptop slowly, heart pounding. It can't be her, she told herself. She can barely hold a stance. And yet, she remembered the way Thelma's eyes had watched everyone in class. Sharp, calculating, like a chess master watching pawns move on the board. The next day, Mia arrived early to the dojo and found Thelma already there, sitting quietly on the bench with her cane across her lap. "Good afternoon," Thelma said warmly, her voice like polished wood. "Hi," Mia replied, hesitating before sitting beside her. "Are you sore from last class?" "A bit," Thelma admitted with a chuckle, "but nothing that won't heal." Mia hesitated, then blurted, "You tied your belt better today." Thelma smiled faintly. "Practice helps." Her eyes softened. "So does patience." Mia wanted to say more, to ask if the woman in the article was really her, but before she could, Rick called the class to order. Today's drills were faster, more complex. Thelma kept up better than before, but not so well that anyone suspected she was holding back. When Rick paired them for sparring, Josh volunteered again. This time his smile was a little meaner. "Remember, light contact only," Rick warned, but there was a note of exhaustion in his voice. Josh threw a combination of quick jabs, pushing Thelma back step by step. She blocked most of them awkwardly but stayed upright. Tyler laughed loudly from the sidelines. "Careful, Josh, don't break Grandma." Thelma wobbled after a kick grazed her hip, but this time, instead of stumbling, she let the momentum carry her into a low stance and reset smoothly. Her calm expression never faltered. She looked almost serene, as though she was the one allowing Josh to attack, measuring him, cataloging his weaknesses. When Rick ended the round, Josh strutted back to Tyler, but his smirk was uneasy, his breathing heavier than hers. That night, after class had ended and the dojo lights were turned off, Mia couldn't shake the feeling gnawing at her. She took the long way home, cutting through the city park where the old oak trees stood like silent guardians. That was when she saw her. Thelma stood in the moonlit clearing, no cane in sight, her GI jacket replaced by a fitted black tank top, her feet bare on the grass. She began to move, slow at first, then faster, each technique flowing into the next with a grace that made Mia forget to breathe. Punches cut the air like blades. Her turns were smooth, her stances rooted, her strikes landing with a power that made the night air crack. This was not the awkward, trembling woman from class. This was something else entirely. When Thelma finished the kata, she stood perfectly still, the night silent around her. Then she turned her head. "You can come out now," she said softly. Mia froze. "The mosquitoes will eat you alive in there," Thelma added, and her voice wasn't scolding. It was warm, almost amused. Mia stepped from the shadows, face flushed. "I wasn't spying," she stammered. "Yes, you were," Thelma said gently. "And that's all right. Sometimes the truth needs witnesses." Mia swallowed hard. "That was amazing. Why don't you move like that in class?" Thelma sat down on a park bench and gestured for Mia to sit beside her. "Because sometimes people see only what they expect, and I needed to know who would look past what they see." Mia's heart thudded. "You are her, aren't you? Thunderhand Gardner?" Thelma didn't answer directly. Instead, she looked up at the stars. "Some names are heavier than others. Some you carry like a shield, some like a scar." Before Mia could press further, headlights swept across the park road. A dark sedan passed slowly, almost deliberately, before disappearing into the night. Thelma's eyes followed it, her posture sharpening almost imperceptibly. "Who was that?" Mia asked. "An old acquaintance," Thelma said quietly. "And if I'm right, this was no accident." She rose gracefully, no trace of stiffness in her movements now. "Go home, Mia. Get some rest. You'll need it." Mia hesitated. "For what?" Thelma's eyes gleamed in the moonlight. "Because things are about to change." As Mia left the park, her mind was a whirlwind. She had seen something she couldn't unsee, and felt a storm building around this quiet, mysterious woman. Across town, the sedan stopped outside a small motel. Inside sat an elderly Japanese man in a gray suit, his posture immaculate even in the cramped car. On the seat beside him lay a folder of old photographs, one of a young Thelma standing victorious in a tournament ring in Tokyo, her fist raised, her expression fierce. He closed the folder, his jaw tightening. "You can't hide forever," he murmured in Japanese. Friday afternoon arrived heavy with heat, the kind that clung to the air and made everything feel too close. Thelma parked her Buick at the far end of the strip mall lot, cane balanced across the passenger seat, and sat there for a moment watching the dojo through the windshield. Even from here she could sense the difference. The chatter of students spilled into the parking lot. Cars lined the curb in a way they never had before. Inside, through the glass, she saw Tyler and Josh laughing with a group of other students, their energy sharper, meaner. When she entered, the laughter faltered but did not stop. It shifted, becoming something quieter and more dangerous, the kind that thrived in whispers. Amanda barely looked up from the desk before gesturing to the bulletin board. "Big announcement," she said. Thelma followed her gaze. A new flyer was pinned there in bold red letters. Challenge Day, this Friday 6 p.m., special match, Sensei Rick Walker versus beginner student, Thelma Gardner, open to friends and family. Come see the fun. Thelma stared at the paper until the words blurred. She felt the students' eyes on her, waiting for her reaction. Tyler leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, smirk spreading across his face like oil on water. "Guess we finally get to see what you're made of, Grandma," he said. Josh laughed, low and ugly. "Better call the paramedics now." Thelma turned toward them slowly, her face unreadable, then smiled. Not the tight, polite smile they expected, but something warmer, deeper. "I accept," she said simply, and walked past them toward the locker room. That one sentence seemed to suck the air out of the hallway. Even Tyler was quiet for a moment before muttering, "She's actually going through with it?" Inside the locker room, Mia was pacing, her ponytail swishing like an anxious pendulum. "You saw it?" she asked as soon as Thelma entered. "I did," Thelma said, placing her bag gently on the bench. "This is a setup," Mia hissed. "Erica's been complaining about you for weeks. She wants to humiliate you in front of everyone. She probably told Rick to agree to this." Thelma folded her GA top with the same precision she'd used her entire life. "Perhaps," she said calmly, "or perhaps this is simply the opportunity I've been waiting for." Mia stopped pacing. "Opportunity? He's a 5th-degree black belt, Thelma. He was state champion 3 years in a row. And what do you think I was, child?" Thelma's voice was soft, but something in it carried weight. Mia swallowed hard, suddenly aware that she was standing in the presence of someone who had stopped pretending, if only for this moment. When challenge day arrived, Golden Dragon looked transformed. Extra chairs lined the walls, paper lanterns hung from the ceiling. Parents, siblings, neighbors, even a reporter from the local newspaper, packed into the room until there was barely space to stand. Erica moved among them like a hostess at a gala, tablet in hand, smiling as though the outcome had already been decided. Rick stood near the front, adjusting the red headband he wore for demonstrations. His face was composed, but his eyes kept darting toward the door as though he was bracing for a storm. When Thelma finally appeared, the room hushed. She wore her GI perfectly pressed, her belt tied neatly, the cane absent. For a moment, she stood just inside the doorway, scanning the faces, Tyler smirking, Josh whispering something to his friend, Mia watching with wide, worried eyes. Then she stepped onto the mat. The evening began with matches between students, quick, light-hearted bouts that drew cheers and laughter from the audience. But there was a current under the noise, a restless energy building as everyone waited for the final event. When Rick stepped to the center of the mat, the chatter quieted. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice projecting, "as part of tonight's program, we have a special match to show that karate is for everyone, young or old, beginner or advanced." He gestured toward Thelma, who walked forward with measured grace. "Miss Gardner will perform a kata from our intermediate curriculum, followed by a sparring demonstration with me." There were a few polite claps, some exchanged glances, parents whispered behind their hands. Tyler chuckled under his breath, already picturing the disaster to come. Rick performed the kata first. Sharp, powerful, textbook perfect. The audience applauded. Then Thelma stepped into the center. Her first movements were slow, hesitant, exactly what everyone expected. Tyler snorted loudly. A ripple of laughter passed through the room. Erica lifted her phone to capture the moment. And then, without warning, Thelma straightened. Her spine aligned, her shoulders rolled back, and suddenly she moved differently. The hesitation vanished. Each technique flowed into the next with startling precision, her breathing deep and controlled, and her gaze fixed like a blade. The laughter died mid-breath. By the final sequence, the room was silent except for the hiss of her gi cutting the air and the sharp, echoing ki that seemed to shake the walls. When she finished, she held the final stance perfectly, unmoving, as though carved from stone. No one clapped at first. Then, slowly, the applause began, hesitant, then building until it filled the dojo. Rick's expression was unreadable as he stepped forward for the sparring match. "Ready?" he asked quietly. "Always," Thelma replied. They bowed. The first exchange was simple, Rick testing her with a probing jab. Thelma didn't move. The punch missed by a whisper. He tried again, faster. She stepped aside as if she had seen it coming before he threw it. The match escalated quickly. Rick's attacks grew sharper, faster, more aggressive. Thelma never struck back. She simply moved, slipping inside his guard, turning just enough to make his punches collapse into empty space. Sweat formed on Rick's temples. The room held its breath. Then came the moment no one expected. Rick overextended on a lunging punch. Thelma stepped forward, soft as a whisper, and placed her palm against his wrist. The precision was surgical, just enough to collapse his stance and send him stumbling forward. The dojo went silent. Rick caught himself, staring at her with wide, stunned eyes. From the back of the room, Tyler shouted, "That's luck," and stormed forward. "I'll show you how it's done." Before Rick could stop him, another voice cut through the tension, deep, calm, and commanding. "You will show respect." The room turned. An elderly Japanese man stood near the door, dressed in an immaculate gray suit. His presence was electric, pulling every eye toward him. He stepped forward, bowing slightly. "You stand in the presence of Thelma Gardner," he said. "Six-time All-Japan Women's Karate Champion, direct student of Master Tanaka." Rick's face drained of color as realization struck. "Thunderhand Gardner," he whispered. The dojo erupted in murmurs. Parents turned to one another, astonished. Josh stared, mouth slightly open. Mia stood straighter, her chest swelling with pride. Erica lowered her phone, her smile frozen and brittle. Thelma stood at the center of it all, her posture now fully revealed. Not a frail old woman, but a master. Dignified, powerful, unshakable. And as silence fell over the room, she looked at each of them, her voice carrying with quiet authority. "Now," she said, "let us see what you've all truly come here to learn." The aftermath of Challenge Day hung over the dojo like smoke after a fire. Word had spread fast, faster than Erica could control. Mia's phone had been buzzing non-stop with messages from classmates asking if the viral video was real. Local martial arts blogs were reposting clips of Thelma's kata with headlines like, "Who is Thunderhand Gardner?" and "Legend returns to the mat after 40 years." When Thelma arrived for the next class, the atmosphere had completely shifted. Students who had once snickered now straightened their stances and bowed as she passed. Some approached timidly, asking questions about her training. Others watched her like hawks, whispering among themselves. Not everyone was pleased. Tyler leaned against the lockers, scowling. "So now we all worship Grandma?" he muttered loudly to Josh, who didn't reply. Josh's silence was a surprise. He hadn't joined in Tyler's laughter since Challenge Day. Instead, he kept sneaking glances at Thelma, as if trying to reconcile the master on the mat with the woman he'd mocked. Erica, meanwhile, had been in full damage control mode. She stormed into Rick's office with her tablet in hand, practically vibrating with fury. "Do you know how many calls I've fielded today? Half of them are reporters, and the other half are parents asking why we didn't tell them we had a 70-year-old black belt champion in class pretending to be a beginner. They think it was a stunt." Rick didn't look up from the paperwork he was pretending to read. "Maybe it's good for business," he said mildly. "Good for business?" Erica snapped. "We built this dojo's reputation on being approachable, modern, family-friendly. This makes us look like a joke. Or worse, like we're running some underground cult of karate mystics. I want her gone, Rick." Rick looked up then, his jaw set. "She's done more to inspire these students in 1 week than we have in the last 6 months. She's a liability," Erica insisted. "She has no signed media release, no competition waiver on file. If she gets hurt, we're responsible." Rick stood, suddenly towering over her. "You just want control. This dojo was never supposed to be about protecting egos. It's about martial arts. And what she showed these students, that was real martial arts." Erica's lips thinned. "Then you deal with the fallout," she said coldly and stormed out, her heels clicking like gunshots across the floor. That evening, Thelma stayed late after class, running a quiet kata in the far corner of the room. Her movements were slower now, more meditative, as if she was listening for something only she could hear. She didn't notice Rick watching from the office doorway until he spoke. "You could have told me," he said quietly. Thelma finished the kata before turning to him. "Would you have believed me?" Rick considered this, then shook his head. "Probably not." Silence stretched between them, heavy but not hostile. Finally, Rick stepped closer. "I want to learn from you," he said. "Not just techniques. I want to know what I don't know." Thelma regarded him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then empty your cup, Sensei. That's where it starts." Before Rick could respond, Amanda appeared, pale and shaken. You need to see this," she said, holding out her phone. On the screen was a photo of the dojo's front window taken less than an hour ago, except now a single word had been spray-painted across the glass in thick black strokes. The Japanese character for shame. Rick swore under his breath and grabbed his keys. "I'll call the police on wall," he said, but Thelma was already moving toward the door, her expression unreadable. "This wasn't random," she said quietly. "You think someone's targeting you?" Rick asked. "I know they are," Thelma replied. The next morning, the dojo was a crime scene. The paint had barely dried when students began arriving, their faces pale as they took in the vandalism. Parents whispered in worried voices, wondering if they should pull their kids from class. Tyler, never one to hide his opinion, muttered just loud enough for Mia to hear, "This is what happens when we let outsiders in." Mia spun on him. "Outsiders? She's more of a martial artist than you'll ever be." Tyler's face darkened. "You think you know her? She's bringing trouble here. Maybe we should all. I'll ask why." Before Mia could answer, Josh stepped between them. "Shut up, Tyler," he said quietly. Tyler blinked, startled. "What, now you're defending her too?" Josh's jaw tightened. "I saw my dad last night. He recognized her, said she's the real deal, and for the first time in my life, he told me I should be learning from her. So maybe you should stop running your mouth and start paying attention." Tyler opened his mouth, then closed it again, the words dying on his tongue. Later that day, Thelma visited the cemetery, her cane tapping softly against the gravel path. She knelt before a weathered gravestone marked James F. Gardner, 1945 to 2005, and placed a single strip of frayed black belt fabric at its base. "They found me, James," she murmured, "just like you said they would." She stayed there for a long moment, her hand resting on the cool stone before rising with a slow, deliberate breath. When she returned to the dojo, a black sedan was parked across the street. The same car Mia had seen in the park. This time the driver stepped out. An elderly Japanese man with a perfect bow and eyes sharp enough to cut glass. "Thelma Gardner," he said formally. "Kenji Tanaka," Thelma replied, her voice quiet but steady. "It's been a long time." 41 years, she said. Kenji glanced at the dojo behind her. "You know who sent the message on your window?" "Yes," Thelma said. "Then you know this will not end with paint," Kenji warned. Thelma's gaze hardened. "Let them come." From across the street, Mia watched, her heart pounding. She didn't understand all of it. Not yet. But she knew one thing. Whatever was coming, the dojo was standing on the edge of something bigger than any of them. Tournament day dawned clear and sharp, as if the sky itself had been scrubbed clean for the occasion. The convention center buzzed with energy, banners hanging from the rafters, mats laid out in neat squares across the polished floor. Teams from across the region crowded the warm-up areas, gi-clad students stretching, practicing katas, whispering last-minute advice to one another. Golden Dragon arrived together, the air around them charged. Some students were excited, others anxious. Thelma walked at the center of the group, serene and steady, her gi pressed to perfection, the black belt around her waist no longer hidden, but worn like armor. Parents and spectators turned their heads as she passed. Whispers rippled through the crowd. That's her. The legend. Thunderhand Gardner. Inside the team area, Erica was pacing, tablet in hand, headset looped around her neck as though she were directing a Broadway show. She caught sight of Thelma and stiffened. "Remember," she said to Rick, "we're here to represent Golden Dragon's brand. No surprises today, no theatrics." Rick didn't answer. He was watching Thelma, and for the first time, he looked more student than instructor. Josh's first match was called early. He stepped onto the mat, glancing once toward Thelma, who gave him the smallest of nods. Something in that nod seemed to anchor him. When the referee signaled, Josh didn't rush in as he once would have. Instead, he stayed calm, breathing steady, allowing his opponent to strike first, redirecting the attack with minimal effort before count, airing with a clean, efficient combination. The match ended quickly, Josh's victory decisive but controlled. In the stands, Josh's father, Alan, was watching, his expression unreadable. Tyler's match came next, and to everyone's shock, he fought differently too. Gone was the reckless aggression that had gotten him in trouble so many times before. When his opponent overextended, Tyler had a chance to knock him down hard, but he pulled the technique, landing a clean, controlled strike instead. The referee gave a warning for not following through, but Tyler only smiled faintly, glancing toward Thelma. By midday, Golden Dragon had already collected more wins than anyone had expected. Spirits were high, until the announcement came over the loudspeaker. Special challenge match. Hiroshi Kojima representing Kojima Elite Combat versus Thunderhand Gardner unaffiliated. The noise in the convention center dropped to a murmur. Heads turned, conversations halted. Erica's face drained of color. "This is not sanctioned," she hissed. "We are not responsible for this." Rick's voice was steady. "This is between them now." Thelma removed her warm-up jacket and stepped onto the mat. Across from her stood Hiroshi, tall, broad-shouldered, his black gi embroidered with his family crest. His expression was calm, but his eyes burned with a fire that had been tended for decades. They bowed, first to the judges, then to each other. The head referee hesitated. "This is highly irregular," he said. "I request it be allowed," Hiroshi said formally. "So do I," Thelma added. After a brief consultation, the judges nodded. "Proceed. Light contact unless otherwise specified." The match began in silence so deep it seemed to press against the walls. Hiroshi struck first, a lightning-fast combination of punches and kicks that would have overwhelmed almost anyone. Thelma moved like water around a rock, redirecting each strike, her feet barely seeming to touch the mat. The crowd gasped as she slipped inside his guard, her hand stopping just short of his ribs before she stepped back, giving him space. Hiroshi's attacks grew sharper, more aggressive, fueled by something deeper than competition. Each exchange was faster than the last, their movements a blur. Sweat beaded on Hiroshi's brow. Thelma's breathing stayed steady, her gaze unflinching. Midway through the match, Hiroshi caught her shoulder with a sharp strike. Thelma staggered slightly, pain flashing across her face. The crowd leaned forward, sensing a turn, but Thelma centered herself with a deep, slow breath and settled back into her stance. "You fight like a woman with nothing left to lose," Hiroshi said between strikes. "I fight like a woman who's already lost too much," Thelma replied. His next attack came like a storm, This time she didn't just evade, she answered. A sweep disarmed his kick, a palm strike stopped his punch mid-air, and with a final fluid movement, she stepped into his guard and placed her hand lightly against his chest, directly over his heart. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Hiroshi froze, chest heaving, eyes wide. She could have ended it, everyone knew it. Instead, she stepped back and bowed. The meaning was unmistakable. The match was over. The silence was total, electric. Then Hiroshi did something no one expected. Slowly, he sank to his knees and bowed his head, the gesture not of defeat but of surrender. "My father told me you ruined his life," he said quietly, his voice carrying just enough for the nearest rows to hear. "But I see now, you saved his art." Thelma placed her hand gently on his shoulder. "The cycle ends with you," she said. The crowd erupted into applause, not just for a fight, but for something larger, something older than any of them. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashed. Erica tried to take control of the narrative, but no one was listening to her now. Parents were congratulating Thelma, students were lining up to shake her hand, and Rick stood at the edge of the mat, bowing deeply. "Sensei," he said simply, voice thick with emotion. In the weeks that followed, Golden Dragon transformed. Erica resigned, unable to recover from the scandal of her rigged tournaments and attempts to erase Thelma's presence. Rick bought her out, renaming the dojo Gardner Tanaka Karate Academy, honoring both Thelma's heritage and her teacher's legacy. Classes filled with new students, inspired by the viral footage of the match. Josh began training under Thelma personally, his movements gaining the same calm precision he had once mocked. Tyler, humbled, started over from white belt at his own request. One bright Saturday morning, Thelma stood at the front of the dojo in her frayed black belt as sunlight streamed through the windows. The students lined up in perfect rows. "Strength," she said, "is not in the fist, it is in the heart." She demonstrated the first movement of a kata, then waited. "Begin," she said. The students moved as one, the sound of their bare feet against the polished floor echoing like drums of a new beginning. As she watched them, Thelma felt something settle inside her. Not victory, not triumph, but peace. The fight she had carried for decades had found its end, not in violence, but in the chance to teach. And this, she realized, was what she had been waiting for all along.